welcome everyone to this Q Community Zoom. It's nice to see people again after the big book launch we had a few weeks back. Q, for those who don't know, is a 4,500 person community of people involved in health and care improvements. So if that sounds like you and you're not a member, please do think of joining. Our speaker today is a Q member called Esther Hall. You want to wave, Esther? There's Esther. Esther is a public health specialist in systems and strategic change in the East Riding of God's own country, Yorkshire. Esther will share a novel community development project funded by Sport England with us. And she'll include the role that systems convening has played in that work, with the caveat that most of us are still quite new to the label systems convening and possibly not even in agreement with that being the right label. And grappling with exactly what it means. The sharp-eyed amongst you will have spotted that Esther is one of the interviewees in the book Systems Convening, which I hope you've all read. The download is free. And we hope to bring more of the Q members who are profiled in the book to you over the coming months, along with other people, hopefully including someone from Surrey, where I know they recently recruited 3 systems conveners to help transform services there. We already have one other Zoom in November about the role of systems convening in the spread of innovation with Diane Ketley. I'm not quite sure if she's here, can't see her. And also us is Eve Holt from Greater Manchester Moving, a sister project to Esther's project, although there's no direct connection, but the importance of systems convening had also come up in her project, in Eve's project. The format for today is a presentation with some opportunities for questions and breakout rooms at one point where we can all meet and learn from each other, and a couple of little announcements related to systems convening before we get going. There's a group space that you can join, and we'll put the links for these things in the chat. There's also a Twitter account to follow, and there's also a Google Doc where you can add your name next to different ways to get involved in relation to systems convening or suggest something new that you'd like to do yourself. So we'll put those links in the chat, and do introduce yourself in the chat. That would be great if you haven't done so already. You know, where you're based and why this Zoom is of interest to you. So yeah, if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. So over to you, Esther.
Lovely, thanks Matthew, and hi everybody. Thanks for coming along. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So I'm going to crack straight on. Matthew's done a great job of introducing it all and kind of where it fits. So yeah, a follow on really from that systems convening work that was maybe was it, I don't know, maybe a month ago now, where we had the book launch. And the thing that came to my mind as we were in that session and in the conversation since was how the work that we're doing in Active Within C and the adult development part of that, so how we build the capacities to do this kind of work in systems convening, really stuck out to me as something that kind of, it seems to meld with it and kind of weave itself in and out of it. And we'll talk a bit about the work that started me off, if you like, how that links to the conveners book that Bev and Etienne have put out there, and then what kind of occurs to you as we're talking about those things, about how the work you do might have some of those things in it, and then how we've tried to work with that. How do we build capacities? What's the reality of that in a community-led community development project? It is public health focused on physical activity, and considering you know, how does that actually work in real life, and what are the things that help it happen? So this is kind of where I'm coming from, and all will become clear, and there will be room at the end then to go in breakouts and have a you know, a more detailed discussion and bring that back hopefully. I haven't tested the timing on this, so I'm really hoping we managed to get that right. So here we go. So this is the picture that you see in the book, and the kind of the breakdown of the little bits of what makes up systems convening. And just like Matt said, not really, you know, had loads of time to go through in detail, but the bits that seem to hit mostly into what I'm talking about really is this boundary work, the identity bit and the agency work, but mostly this identity work. So this seems to me the bit that most talks to what I'm going to talk about today. And some of the reason for that is, as we look at that a little bit more closely, is this how the support for personal transformation is in that mix. And so thinking about where that kind of fits in my mind in the work that we're doing is right back at the beginning when I was started doing this kind of stuff before the Active Withnessy project. One of the really important learnings for me, and one of the places I started, was about this internal piece. So what is my internal landscape, or what is inside of the people that we're trying to work with? And I was looking at Theory U at the time, and some of you will be familiar, and this open heart, open mind and open will, and this who is myself and what is my work, and how important that internal bit is to how I can, the work that I then bring forth, or likewise the people that I'm trying to work with, what they're bringing forth. And that's a really important dimension that we're working with and hoping to build. So that kind of fitted really nicely for me. So something in conversation with Matthew earlier today, which I hadn't really come to, was that there's a thing about the people in the community that we're trying to do in this Active Withnessy project, that we're trying to work with and help talk better with each other and understand each other better and these things. And that's requiring them to develop in some of these ways. And like I say, with this identity and this internal landscape, but also it's about me as the convener of this, if you like, and trying to organize it all. How am I changing? How am I developing, and how is that kind of showing up? So there's these two bits that are inseparable really, in terms of how this work comes forth. But in the book, I think it's about maybe the people actually in the community doing the convening, rather than maybe myself and the development inside of me. But I think they're really connected. So why adult development? So building the capacities that allow us to understand our world and move through the world in an increasingly kind of coherent and complex way, so we can understand all the bits of it. So before this work with Sport England, I was working in public health and looking at complexity and what that meant for the ways that we work in public health and in our commissioning and in our community work as well. And I was looking at Theory U, as I've mentioned, and because I was looking at Theory U, I was holding sessions across the system. So I was trying to bring together chief execs, senior leaders, practitioners, and then residents, people on the ground. And as I was doing that work and bringing people together and asking them about, a range of particular things in a place in Yorkshire, it really threw up some very interesting dynamics, which without having been in those rooms, I don't think would have triggered me into this work. So what I found is that as the residents, the people on the ground, were describing their experience on a particular subject and saying, oh, well, this didn't really work for me, or I couldn't find that in this place, or this was how it worked for me. The more senior leaders, chief execs and similar, couldn't hear that, and in the room were saying that's not true. We put a thing in place, and so that can't possibly be true. And so, in my naivety, as I'm in this room and I'm thinking these poor people are telling this, this story of this heartfelt experience of whatever it is, and then just get said that's not true. And it's like, oh my Lord. And of course I know these senior leaders and our conversations, these are not evil people. These are really, they want to do good work. They want to really, bring what they have. So what was going on here, and how could we do something? So yes, about the more senior professional roles, and there's things about a risk in there and accountability and things like that, but knowing that as we're moving more into this community-led public health in particular, and I know in the NHS wanting to move more into that sort of patient-led way of working, this connection between those senior levels and what's going on the ground, increasingly important. And so we really need to find a way of helping that to happen better. So as I'm thinking, oh crikey, okay, this is more than a weekend course, it's more than a bolt-on. And then in conversations with Matthew, actually, has been a real help to me in working this through and helping me understand some of this territory, which I didn't know existed. there's a whole thing on adult development since the 70s. There's research and different ways of talking about it and thinking about it. And so I looked at all of that, and more recently we've started to work with this book Upgrade here by Richard Boston and Karen Ellis, and they boil things down to these 4 key capacities that say, as you're developing these capacities, then you're going to be able to work in a more complex way and be able to work in community and hear each other and these kinds of things. And this sense making, how do we make sense of the world around us? How do we put ourselves in other people's shoes so that we can take different perspectives? How do we understand ourselves? And then how to hold opposing views and challenge, how to work with that. So as thinking of adult development as this kind of area of research, as we're increasing our ability to do these things, we're able to see a more complex picture and operate in a more complex way. And I put the tree there because it's kind of like, developing new rings of a tree. So all these things are in there and you don't lose anything as you go, but you're kind of just building the next layer across as you're having those experiences. The learning that you're having about yourself and about how you're working in the world starts to grow in those layers. I picked this particular picture of a tree because you'll see it's got some significant cracks in. It's quite imperfect, and I thought, well, that really reflects what really goes on. It's not a perfect picture. So that's just kind of the intro and where I came from and how it all fit together. And I just thought we'd have a little pause here to see, well, how's that landing for you? Does it chime? Or and maybe a question. If not, doesn't matter. We'll just give it a couple of minutes. Well, that's okay. If nothing's occurring to people, that's all right. I'll go on. I just didn't want to ramble on through it all if people had thoughts they wanted to bring. So having this kind of new thing that I was bringing, and then we had Active Witnessy, which is this Sport England funded project which wanted to bring all, be community led, bring in sort of the things on complexity and what that required of the work that we needed to do. And so I was able to bring this thinking and this previous work into this project. And as we, some of what I'm going to talk about later, we have a program to help people develop these capacities. And after this first cohort of that program, we developed these principles. And you can see in them, I'm not going to go through them all, but spread the learning, time to reflect, tuning in, facilitate, don't dictate. So this was kind of the Bible of how we were doing that work to start with. So I just wanted to flash that up because that's kind of that's what the work is centered around, and that came from our initial work on adult development. And you can get the tune of kind of what we were trying to do in the community. So we had a group of people on the ground trying to do that listening, building those relationships, building the trust, really, being in of the place, so that they could start to really hear what was wanted and what needed to be developed as part of this project. So as I talked about the programme that led to these principles, the programme was devised by Dr. Rachel Lilly. So at that time, she was in Aberystwyth, and she had developed this programme to do a similar kind of thing, to draw this awareness into decision making and behaviour change and this kind of thing with Welsh Government. So she'd been doing that for a few years, and I knew of her work, and we chatted often. And then I thought, well, if we could pull that through and start to try and make it fit for a community setting, and try and bring it into that kind of a place. I thought that, that brings some real learning and strength to all the stuff I'd been thinking about. And so she did, which was good. And so I'm going to just do a little description of her programme, just to give you a flavour of what the kind of thing that sits in there. So, we say, all right, okay, we want people to develop these capacities, and we can see what they are, and we know we've got the rings of the tree, but it's kind of great, we can't say go over there and take more perspectives, and go over there and, how can people do that? You can't just lift them up and then suddenly they can do this new thing that they haven't done before, or see the world in a different way. So this to me is the how of what does that actually look like when you're trying to put it into place. So the programme starts really with looking at complexity and looking at what is the society that we live in, you know, over the last 100 or so years. How has that developed? How have things changed? How is the pace of our work? How do we understand, you know, our brains and safety and well-being and all this complex stuff that sits around us? So that's the first bit that which she talks about. So what is the complexity out there, and kind of trying to draw some lines around that, so people are starting to talk about that in their own terms. And we use the Convening framework, if you're familiar, as well, which just helps to place that complexity in a broader range of kind of system characteristics. So then looking at that complexity and becoming aware of that, looking at neuroscience and a range of stuff in there, is becoming aware of the complexity inside, which I know we've kind of alluded to before, and where I think this is different then to what largely happens in, you know, looking at the externals. It's really looking at what's inside us and what's going on. And so under the bonnet, she called it at this point, and looking at bias, unconscious bias, mind, attention, these kinds of things, that, you know, this is how we move through the world, and how can we understand that better if we know that a lot of our work is in relationship, and it's in this talking, it's in this understanding each other. Then that's a core piece that really gets no attention whatsoever in lots of places, especially in local authority, where maybe there isn't the time and the funding to put attention to those things. So the sense making, the things that we talked about, opposable thinking, as those 4 characteristics, those 4 capacities. And then alongside that, so we've got the complexity outside, where are we in, then where is the complexity in here, but then developing a sense of our bodies, and as we're going into a room to have a conversation, what are the signs and signals that might influence how that conversation goes. So if I'm going in there and I'm nervous, you know, my heart rate's a bit up and I've got a bit of a sweat on, or I've already decided this is going to be a tough conversation, or maybe I'm making assumptions about, you know, what they're bringing, or, you know, all these things that kind of show up in our bodies, but we're not always paying attention. So maybe I've got hunched shoulders or a clenched jaw, or maybe I'm just giving off some vibe. You know, it's these kinds of this kind of attention that we're trying to pull through in this program. And we talked a lot about this because it's quite unusual to try and bring this through. So there's the physical and the emotional in there, and kind of how those two mix together, and the heart and the mind, the emotion and the brain, and how those two things sit together to help for those things to happen, for us to notice that they're happening. So this is the self-relating part. So how I feel is how I see. So if I've had a bad day, I'm going to see you in a slightly less good light, you know, and just knowing that's there can help us to work with it. So we use mindfulness. We did find that wasn't always what people could work with, and so we then started to work with trying to use heart rate variability, and that's still, you know, we're still trying to just work with that a little bit and develop it. So this chance for noticing ourselves, being more aware of ourselves, what are the different ways and the different tools that might help people to do that, breath work and positive imagery, you can see there. So we're trying out different ways. And then helping people stay with the experience. So, okay, so I'm in this room, I'm having this experience, I'm maybe having a bit of a tough time in this conversation, or it's not quite flowing as I want it to. But rather than kind of just say, oh God, that was horrible, and put it away, say, oh, okay, what was happening in there, and what's happening in there, and what can we do with it that's different, so that next time I come to this, or actually in that moment, as people get a bit better at it, what different choices can I make about how this conversation goes and my part in that. Those difficult conversations are these heat occurrences that are evidence to help people develop, but as long as they've got this peer coaching and reflective practice that sits around it. So we wanted them to go out and apply and experiment out there to amplify the connection, the collaboration, the development, but making sure that stuff is around them, so that you can help them develop rather than just feeling kind of lost and in pain sometimes. So that just gives you a run through. You can see the elements that we were thinking that Rachel had thought were in that picture on how we could help people develop those capacities in this kind of a setting. So not only that, though, I think it's important to say that there was a container here, which we talked about, that supported the work. And that's coming more to the fore the more that we do the work. So there was the whole project approach of Sport England, who were recognised complexity, the way they funded us, that recognising that it was a fluid and a long game, that you know, it was iterative and it changed often, and there was all of that kind of sewn in, knowing that it was across the whole system, and trying to bring some of those bits together. And those systems were, again, is a container that allowed for this testing and understanding and seeing what changes happened, but along all the time with this support for change. We want to help whoever this is, whether it's a partner, a stakeholder, a person in the town, or a member of staff. We want everyone to change and grow in a way that makes sense to them, and so they can get more fun and more thriving and more, you know, fulfillment out of their lives. And at that point, we weren't quite as heavily focused on physical activity, although that's certainly coming more back into focus now, but really wanted to focus on those other pieces. So what we did Rachel's programme, and we measured them. There is a measure, believe it or not, of adult development. And so we did that at the beginning of Rachel's course, and then we measured again in 18 months later. And forget the labels down the side, but you can see just from the direction of the lines that over that 18 months, you know, the majority, I think bar one, lifted from their original starting point. So they moved through some of these stages, they developed some of those capacities. So we didn't know, you know, that was a direct result. You know, weren't trying to tie that together, but it certainly gave us some reason to kind of to keep working with this and to start trying to move forward with it. So that was quite, you know, quite a buzz. I have to tell you that it seemed to be quite impactful as a whole thing. But then last September, loads of stuff changed. So staff were leaving for different roles. So because obviously if this is a time limited project until 2025, and so a couple of people left. We had a restructure so that there was more operational support. We had COVID, obviously, we had to do everything online. There was no face-to-face sessions. At the same time, Rachel was coming from Aberystwyth as a kind of almost an independent consultant with a foot in Aberystwyth University to coming into Birmingham University, and that causing some change in how she was looking at stuff and bringing the adult development element of that more to the fore than she had done previously. So there was loads of stuff, just kind of, I don't know how to explain it, doing this. It was really unstable, it felt, and quite chaotic at times, and a quite difficult environment. And Rachel and I thought, yeah, okay, we're still going to try and run this. We're still, you know, we're going to try and pull this through because of the new staff, and because we were moving as well into a delivery phase rather than, you know, than this exploratory phase that we'd been in previously. So so we thought, no, we're gonna try and do this, which we did. But they didn't. There's basically new team, new leadership on the ground. People didn't engage with it online. It didn't have at all the same effect that it had when we all met in a room and we all, you know, kind of heard each other, spoke with each other, laughed with each other, kind of, you know, did all that stuff that helps this stuff really stick when we're in that group setting. And we didn't have the in-person coaching as well that we talked about, the support in the heat experiences, that as much as you could have an online thing, that personal one-to-one in each other's space stuff wasn't possible. We also found that people's perception of mindfulness prevented their relevance. They'd been doing mindfulness maybe, or maybe some sort of meditation, but it was really cordoned off to a well-being space or to something that's precious to me, that is in my own time, that I don't necessarily want to bring that here, or it didn't make sense to them. And so that was something, as we started to develop the heart rate variability thing, to try and bring it to a space that it became, you know, it could be about biofeedback, about, you know, if I can tell how much sleep I've had and how I'm eating and how that affects my heart rate variability, we can also see how my relationships change and how I go into the conversations can also change. So we were starting to work with some of that on this basis. But the people in this new team, this new room, hadn't been on the journey. Basically, you know, they hadn't been part of all that sort of coming through together. But we did find that people were demonstrating the behaviours of developing. So yes, the program didn't quite do what we wanted it to, in the same way that it had done, but we were still seeing that they were doing these behaviours, taking different perspectives, self-relating, being aware of their unconscious bias. But they didn't see it as a product of the program. But then linking it back, even though they didn't see it as part of the adult development program, they really saw it as part of the principles, which of course were derived from the original program. So we don't know, we're just working this out. So we're just having the review meeting tomorrow where we've spoken to everybody and pulling all that information together. Yeah, back to the principles, which is, that feels quite strong actually, but it also helps us to think about what is it in the container and the system of itself that is still allowing that development to happen, regardless, and yeah, still working that out. But the thing that I think moving forward for sure is that we're going to be pulling together, Christopher Pietroni is at Birmingham working with Rachel on that adult development piece and leadership, and helping that happen in a way that agrees with kind of some of that other research that's going on in that area. But we're definitely bringing that together with our systems consultant Gerald Midgley, who's at Hull, and Rachel and Gerald bringing together this idea of, if we're trying to work in systems, we need to hear each other. And he does work on marginalisation and how we can work to stop that happening as much, and bringing those two bits together. So that's kind of where the future is tending to lead us. There's more questions than answers, but I think in terms of being a systems convener, that development of self, development of the people on the ground, in the hope of the development of people as residents, just to, I guess, not be in fear of each other, or not feel that just because he's different to me over there that he's I don't want to speak to him, or I don't want to get involved with him. So just to help them at least come together a little bit better. So these are the thoughts, and so now it's time for breakouts. I have no idea what the timing is because my phone's gone off. So I'll pass over to either Matthew or Jorian.
I'm creating the room here, just a second, because I want to make sure all the buttons are pressed.
Esther, do you want to just say what people could, what kind of question people could kind of talk about
Yeah, I guess I would like to I don't know, people to talk about, does this show up for you, and if it does, how, and in terms of the program, does that look like it might work or might not work? And so I guess that's it. And if there are any, of course, links to the systems convening stuff, because I've not really had a chance to really pull that apart. So if there's any thoughts on that, so basically whatever's coming to you, but they're just some ideas of what you might want to talk about.
All right, folks, I'm going to beam you there, and I'll see you in 12 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Do people want to maybe share some of what came up in your discussions? Anything in particular that stood out, or any questions, any penetrating questions that you want to ask Esther? Or yeah, does someone want to start? Ishan?
Hi there. Fascinating conversation. I have to apologise, I came a little bit late because I was on the school run, so I only caught the last half. But I had a question which you may have addressed already, Esther, but one that's really kind of troubling me almost, is that what I notice is that people within the system are often at loggerheads because they've got their vested interests and they're looking at it from their perspective, like that little kind of image that you showed us, kind of the 6 and the 9 from the ways. And it strikes me that the only reason that looking down at that image, we know that they're both in the right, is because we're outside it. We can see it from both perspectives. And by extrapolation, in a way, you need to be outside the system to recognize what it really is. It's like the metaphor is for me, the kind of fish in water. You don't see the water because that's everywhere. So my question related to that is, how do you get people to almost step outside the system to recognize what's happening and their contribution to and for it? How do you get them out of the water to extend that? Because that seems to be what's missing.
Yes, and I haven't got the answer. I haven't got the answer to that. Thank you, Hisham, for my first question. We have got Gerald Midgley, who is a professor in systems thinking, who is helping us think about this. So he's just now starting to work more in one place with our implementation with the immediate system. So not so much the broader system, but then so that's the kind of work that I think he will be trying to do as well. So I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but he seems to have quite a variety of tools at his disposal. So watch this space. If you ask me that question in a year's time, I might be able to help you. But interested to hear what other people are thinking about that.
I'm happy to jump in on the same question, I suppose, and because it's something I've grappled with a lot in terms of thinking about, can you then be, if we're using the term systems convener, it's a lot easier if you two are outside of the system, and that was the role that I played for a long time then in a consultancy role, and it was a lot easier because you're external to then help others also to lift up and be outside. And now, I guess, in my current role, I'm far more, I am in the systems that I'm convening, and having to be very mindful of that all the time and recognise when I'm potentially being pulled in with all the bias that come with that. And at which point, what role am I playing? Am I being a systems convener, or am I actually just, part and parcel of a participant, and having to be very intentional about which role and what I'm doing, what do other people foresee? In terms of helping people step out, so I don't know, I mean, the training I had was around, I don't know if people know, David Grove and clean language was where I started off in my coaching facilitation journey, and then systems modelling and using metaphors in particular. So I guess that's where I've seen people by exploring their landscape of its individual coaching. I've seen the same things happen for systems at a huge scale with, convening 300 people, where those metaphors have enabled people to step back and see the landscape for themselves and connect with that in a very different way. Which takes back, I guess, to the point you're making before, Esther, around all the people making about meditation and mindfulness, because I've seen by having at the start of any conversation a moment of that reflection, generally not calling it that, because if TFGM or others that I work with, I called it, they were going to do meditation, they would run away. But I've had other people come to me afterwards and go, oh, that exercise at the beginning, that was kind of like meditation, wasn't it? I'm like, oh, you spotted that. But that moment to just connect in a different way helps them to then kind of get to a different place in that visualization. And poetry is another one that helps. But anyway, that's enough for me.
I see. I'm gonna that use of metaphor and all of that. I'd never considered that as part of a bigger thing. To be able to do 300 people, for instance. I'll have to pick your brains, I think. And this hands up. I don't know who's orchestrating the hands up. I better leave it to Matthew and Jory.
I think John was the first. Please, John.
I've got a couple of answers to that, or perspectives on it. I think the first one is, if there's a kind of rooted system where people are working the same way and they kind of surround themselves with people thinking that way, that's kind of a defense mechanism. And what ideally you have to do is take those people out of that context and expose them to lots of different views, especially if you can put them in a minority in a room. So, having a comfortable NHS manager put in the room full of patients and frontline clinicians and other people involved in charities and community sectors, expose them to the views that are different from their own narrative, can help them reframe and understand things. And I think that's a good way of kind of busting people out of their bubble. But the other thing I think, and a piece of work I really like, is David Marquet's intent-based leadership, where there's a ladder. And he asks people to first of all say what they see. So they have to describe the environment in their own way. And then what do you intend to do about it? And it kind of, it makes people reframe their worldview. And I found that a good way of kind of getting people to take more ownership individually of what the world they see and how they can respond to it, rather than just following the system in the way that it's telling them how to do. But it varies from person to person. Some people are always going to engage and some people are much harder to reach.
Yeah, thanks, John Paul. There's some interesting stuff in there. There was a question in the chat: how do you get a horse to the water, if you like, to drink, which I thought was quite interesting. But I think Matt's got his hand up as well next.
Yeah, it was just to give a slightly different view, I guess. I think once we start working with people who are in the system, I'm not sure we can take them out of the system, but we can help them get those different perspectives, different views by creating that space for curiosity, to get those different perceptions. And within that, there's a piece about how they then, by asking and attending and listening, they start to value each other more as well. So it's bringing them together on a really sort of relational basis as well. But I think it's really hard to step out of the system, however we may frame that, because we were sort of having discussions about, well, what's a container, and where are those boundaries, and have we got boundaries, and sort of slightly artificial in a way when we start talking about that. But they're helpful, but they are drawn by us. I think, yeah, just to change it to, can we really step outside, or is this a slightly different way of doing things?
Yeah, that's really interesting. But yeah, there's a couple of people talking about constellations in the chat, so I'm just wondering if someone could bring something in on that, maybe.
Aaron, do you want to say something? I mean, I don't know if people know constellations. It's where you kind of embody a system, usually in maybe people will stand and embody parts of a system, and you move them around to show maybe the future of the system or the different roles. And it can be a very emotional and embodied way to kind of see what's happening in the system. And it tends to surface kind of strange wisdom that seems to emerge from almost nowhere, like magic. And I've kind of once or twice heard of people using it in healthcare, but not very much. I know one Q member trained in it. It's an offshoot of family constellations work. It's the organizational version of that. But Karen, did you say that have you used it, or you're aware of it?
So yeah, I'm a coach as well, and so I'm aware of things like that from my coaching work, that I tend to generally do one-to-one and also outside of the organisation. I probably lack confidence, is what it comes down to introduce it into the NHS arena, partly because I know that I need probably somebody by me to be able to make it work properly. And there's just hardly any knowledge about things like this with the people that I currently work with. So maybe I just need to be a bit braver. I'm working up to something for a meeting I've got next week, actually. And some of this is really helping, and it could possibly work. So maybe I just need to go for it.
I love the sound of that, Karen. It just feels like, you know, there's an energy at the moment around going for it, and around, you know, we need to jump off a little bit right now. And people like you, you know, it sounds like wonderful stuff that you're thinking about and using, and it's kind of all there. It's like, you know, beggars belief, really. The NHS Horizons have got it all there. You know, our improvers, our change, we've got community, but where is it? How is it showing up? So, you know, I'll just give you a little boost there, Karen, and say, go for it, girl. And yeah, good luck.
And also, I'm not sure if I'm in a position to offer this, but if you do ever need guinea pigs to try out any of these things before you try it with others, maybe me and some others from Q and beyond could be used. But then again, we're all around the UK, so it ends up being on Zoom, which I don't even know if Constellations works via Zoom, to be honest. It becomes a bit different. But yeah, but our liberating structured user group's a bit like that. Lots of people just trying things out and trying things for the first time, maybe before they use them with, you know, the leadership team or the CCG or whatever.
I mean, it makes me think of obviously the social presence in theatre of Theory U, which just, again, it just feels that step too far of, you know, if I went into some of my and said, hey, let's act it out, you know, like, oh my God, yeah, God only knows what that would end up with. But so I get a sense of it, but this stuff is out there, and where it seems to agree, I think, is that bodily awareness, that embodiment of it, that awareness of what it is, and moving it to a different level. So it's not just here all the time, it starts to move into a fuller thing. And I'm really interested in how that changes the energy for people as well, and what happens with that then, and the intimacy then, not only with yourself, but with what is happening around you. It brings a different richness and a different quality to that work, I think. I'm just looking if there's any other hands. I can't see anyone.
One of the things that I'm sort of hearing in this discussion is that it sounds like a lot of people kind of feel like they're isolated and that there's a lot of really good ideas being present in this space, but to go back, you'd kind of be alone in your ability to influence, and that feels maybe like a very vulnerable position. I think this resonates with my last job when I was in a 50,000 person organization, and I thought, I'm the only one who sees this. I'm the only one who sees systems around me and all of these options. I have so many good ideas. The thing that I found really helpful was finding others. So was there a way that I could make myself visible, asking questions in big town halls that other people said, oh, Narayan, that what you just said there, like, how do can I connect with you? And then we started to form pods of people who were starting to think similarly in this way. And I was able to demonstrate things with partners. So there was somebody one department over from me who was sort of on the same page. And then we would facilitate things together. And I found for me personally, that was just like much better, and it ended up starting to form a network of people who were feeling isolated and did believe in this kind of work. And I'm also kind of wondering, I've heard a couple people mention they're from NHS here. I wonder if this is sort of the seeds of people, how many people in this room will actually start to connect with each other and say, Karen, I'd love to help you with this thing that you want to do, because it's also for my learning too, and maybe we can learn together.
Lovely. Yeah, really nice, the rhyme. And it's, you know, thinking about the work in the council, it's exactly it. So I get a little whisper somewhere, oh, you know, we seem to, you know, let me just see if I can just grab over there and let's have a chat about that. Or maybe there's a little thing I can do for your team, because I think we're on the same page, and then gradually kind of building this thing, which it's like you say, such a help, not only to make you feel not so vulnerable, but to actually get some stuff going. Yeah, really nice, Narayan, thank you. Couple of minutes, Matthew.
Danielle, I think you're on mute. Were you putting your hand up?
I was just a few thoughts about what you said, Narayan. You know, I also feel that, you know, we are, I don't know, the workload is so, you know, so high, and all the things that I do that connect, you know, with convening and all these kind of things is not visible, and that as a result, it doesn't count in my workload. Right now, for example, I've had my colleague who's just left, and guess what? I'm taking on her job as well, and I'm still on their hours. And as a result, they've just appointed me as head of business engagement. You know, wonderful. And we had a meeting today, and it's my first meeting, you know, with them. And oh, but there's an emergency. We need to, you know, come up with renewing the business apprenticeship. I mean, you know, forget it. So when we talked in our group, when we talked about, you know, the idea of container, I was saying that perhaps that's my French influence, but, you know, I like to think of marketplace with just a roof over our head. And to me, you know, this is about creating opportunities to informally somehow find some space, find some time to be under that roof, you know, where we know we just interact. And some of us come to buy or to sell, depending on what we're doing. You know, that's what happens in the market. You know, you've got some vegetables in the garden, and you come and sell them, for example, or you come and buy them, and that creates it's an excuse basically to talk and to, you know. And I had a chance to do this with the faculty when we had to review the, you know, the mission statement. And I organized an event like this with my colleagues. And it's as if I was discovering them for the first time. We did some crazy things, and, you know, it was a bit crazy. But it generated so much energy and so many ideas. But then we fell back into that, you know, top-down structure, and nothing really came out of this apart from a mission statement that was written on a piece of paper, but it was not really, you know. So to me, it's really about creating these informal spaces where we can just, you know, leave at some point, you know, and know that this space is not for work, you know, really as it is officially, but it is really about networking, as you said, Narayan. You know, I really like your work. I haven't had a chance, you know, to speak with you, but I can see, you know, that we're on the same page or something like that, you know. So how do we, you know, create informal opportunities like that, where we can have this kind of exchanges that do not fall into the remit of our work, you know, and the description that's on the CV or on, you know, the work description, basically.
I think we've got to 6 o'clock, so I think we'll need to wrap it up. Although maybe if people can stay on for a minute or two, I think maybe John Paul has another question, but we should wrap it up for people that need to leave now. So thanks so much to Esther for sharing this kind of challenging, pioneering work, and hearing from all the other people, you know, Narayan and Danielle, and people who are also pushing the envelope as systems conveners into these new places, and seeing where we can take things. You know, I think I love the final line from the book. What was it? Small social miracles. You're trying to do these things which so often fail, but sometimes we can create these small social miracles, slightly larger, you know, maybe in Greater Manchester, it's a larger social miracle. But thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Esther. Do come to our next Zoom in a month's time with Diane Ketley from NHS Horizons, talking about systems convening and innovation and spread in the NHS. That should be good. Do stay active on the Twitter account, the group space, and so on. I think that's it. Is there anything else, Esther, you want to add, or anything? I think Joriam's got some. Wait, Joriam, you're on mute. You're pointing.
Oh, just saying, inviting Esther to talk, but you did it first.
I wanted to just say I love that marketplace thing, Danielle. So yeah, that's logged. I'll be using that.